Welcome to Story Planet, where every tale is a journey into the heart of timeless love and cherished memories. Today, we invite you to join us at Willowbrook Cottage, a place where the warmth of companionship and the beauty of a life well lived come together in a story that will touch your heart. So, find a cozy spot, relax, and let the story of Edward and Lillian remind you of the enduring power of love. Let's begin. Forever at Willowbrook Cottage. In the quiet countryside, far from the noise and hurry of the city, stood Willowbrook Cottage, a place where time seemed to move, a little slower. The cottage was a small, charming home with ivy-covered stone walls, a thatched roof, and flower boxes brimming with colorful blooms. It sat at the edge of a meadow that sloped gently down to a sparkling stream, where the water flowed peacefully over smooth stones, and the willow trees dipped their long, graceful branches into the water. For over 50 years, Willowbrook Cottage had been home to Edward and Lillian, a couple who had shared a lifetime of memories within its cozy walls. Now, in their golden years, Edward and Lillian spent their days in quiet companionship, enjoying the simple pleasures of life. Theirs was a love that had deepened with time, growing stronger with each passing season, like the roots of the ancient oak tree that stood proudly in the garden. It all began in the summer of 1958. Edward was a young man fresh out of university, eager to begin his career as a teacher in the nearby town. Lillian, a librarian with a romantic heart, was his perfect match. Their paths crossed at a town picnic, and from that moment their lives were intertwined. They built a life together at Willowbrook Cottage, a haven of love and contentment, where they raised their children and weathered the storms of life. Now, in their twilight years, they found solace in the rhythms of their quiet life, filled with the memories they had created together. It was late autumn, and the days had grown shorter, the air cooler. The leaves on the trees had turned to shades of gold, amber, and crimson, and the landscape was bathed in a warm golden light as the sun began to set. Inside the cottage, a fire crackled softly in the stone hearth, casting a gentle glow across the room. The scent of applewood smoke mingled with the aroma of freshly brewed tea, filling the air with a comforting warmth. Edward sat in his favorite armchair by the fire, a soft woolen blanket draped over his lap. He was a tall, slender man with silver hair and kind blue eyes that had seen much of the world. He held a book in his hands, its pages worn and well-loved, but he wasn't reading just then. Instead, he gazed into the flames, lost in thought, the flickering light reflecting in his eyes. Lillian was nearby, seated on the cushioned window seat that overlooked the garden. She was a petite woman with soft white curls and a gentle smile that could light up a room. Her hands, once so busy with the tasks of raising a family, now held a knitting needle and a skein of soft, pale blue yarn. She was knitting a scarf for their granddaughter, a task she enjoyed for the soothing rhythm and the joy it brought her, to create something with her hands. The room was filled with a peaceful stillness, the kind that comes from years of shared understanding and quiet contentment. The only sounds were the crackling of the fire, the occasional clink of Edward's teacup as he set it down on the table beside him, and the soft click of Lillian's knitting needles. Outside, the wind rustled the leaves, carrying with it the faint scent of wood smoke from a distant chimney. After a while, Lillian paused in her knitting and looked out the window. The garden, which had been so vibrant in the summer, was now preparing for its winter rest. The flowers had faded, and the trees had shed most of their leaves, leaving behind bare branches that reached toward the sky. But there was still beauty in the scene. The soft carpet of fallen leaves, the late-blooming chrysanthemums that added a splash of color, and the birds that flitted among the branches, their songs a cheerful reminder that life continued, even as the seasons changed. "Edward," Lillian said softly, turning her gaze to her husband, "do you remember the first time we saw this cottage?" Edward looked up from his thoughts, a smile spreading across his face as he met her eyes. "How could I forget?" he replied, his voice warm with affection. "It was early spring, and the garden was just beginning to bloom. You fell in love with it the moment you saw it." Lillian nodded, her eyes twinkling with the memory. "I did. It felt like home the instant we stepped inside, and it's been home ever since." Edward leaned back in his chair, his thoughts drifting back to that day so many years ago. They had been newlyweds then, full of hope and excitement, searching for a place to start their life together. When they had stumbled upon Willowbrook Cottage, tucked away at the end of a winding country lane, they knew they had found something special. The cottage was old even then, with creaking floors and drafty windows, but it had a warmth and charm that spoke to their hearts. They had spent years making it their own, filling it with love, laughter, and memories. "This old cottage has seen a lot, hasn't it?" Edward mused, his voice tinged with nostalgia. The children growing up, the holidays, the quiet evenings like this. Lillian smiled gently, setting her knitting aside. "It has, and it's kept us warm and safe through all of it." They fell into a comfortable silence, both of them lost in their thoughts, letting the memories wash over them like a gentle tide. The fire crackled softly, and the shadows danced on the walls, creating a cozy cocoon of warmth and light. Outside, the sun had dipped below the horizon, and the first stars were beginning to twinkle in the deepening twilight. After a while, Lillian rose from her seat and crossed the room to sit beside Edward. She reached for his hand, and he took it, their fingers intertwining in a gesture, as familiar as breathing. They sat together in the glow of the fire, their hearts filled with gratitude for the life they had shared, the love that had sustained them, and the peace that came from knowing they had lived well. "Do you remember the nights we used to sit out on the porch and listen to the crickets?" Lillian asked, her voice soft and melodic. "The stars were always so bright out here, away from the city lights." Edward nodded, a fond smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I do, and how we used to listen to the owls, calling to each other in the trees. The sound was like music." Lillian sighed contentedly. Those were good times. "They still are," Edward said, squeezing her hand gently. "We've been blessed, Lillian. More than we could ever have imagined." Lillian rested her head on his shoulder, her heart full. "Yes, we have." As the evening wore on, the fire began to burn lower, its warmth now a gentle glow. The room was bathed in soft shadows, the kind that invite rest and reflection. Edward and Lillian remained where they were, their hands still clasped, their hearts at peace. They didn't need words to fill the silence. Their love and understanding spoke for them. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, and the first snowflakes of the season began to fall, drifting gently to the ground. The world was quiet, wrapped in the hush of a winter's night, while inside the cottage, the warmth of love and memory created a sanctuary of comfort and peace. A few days later, as winter settled in, Edward and Lillian decided to indulge in one of their favorite traditions, a moonlit dinner in their backyard. The sky was clear, and the full moon hung high above, casting a silvery light over the snow-covered garden. The trees, their branches bare, shimmered in the moonlight, creating a scene of quiet beauty. Edward had set up a small table beneath the old oak tree, the same tree that had witnessed so many of their special moments. He laid out a simple yet elegant meal, a pot of Lillian's favorite stew, fresh bread, and a bottle of wine they had been saving for just such an occasion. Lillian brought out the finishing touches. 2 candles in glass holders, their flames flickering gently in the night air. They sat together under the stars, wrapped in warm blankets, the cold air nipping at their cheeks. The world around them was still, save for the occasional rustle of the wind through the trees and the soft crunch of snow underfoot. As they enjoyed their meal, they talked about everything and nothing, their conversation flowing as easily as it always had. They reminisced about the past, shared their hopes for the future, and simply enjoyed the pleasure of each other's company. After dinner, they lingered at the table, savoring the last of the wine and the quiet of the night. The moonlight bathed the garden in a soft glow, and the stars twinkled like diamonds in the sky. It was one of those moments that felt timeless, where the world seemed to pause, allowing them to simply be, together, content and at peace. As the night grew colder, Edward and Lillian finally rose from the table, reluctant to leave the beauty of the moonlit garden, but grateful for the warmth that awaited them inside. Hand in hand, they walked back to the cottage, their hearts full and their spirits light. The fire in the hearth welcomed them home, and as they settled into their chairs, the comfort of the evening wrapped around them like a familiar embrace. With the arrival of December, the couple's thoughts naturally turned to Christmas, a holiday they had always cherished. Even in their older age, Edward and Lillian approached the season with the same enthusiasm they had in their youth. They loved everything about Christmas: the decorating, the baking, the gathering of family, and the simple joy of sharing the holiday together. As was their tradition, they began by decorating the cottage. Edward climbed the ladder to the attic, carefully bringing down the boxes, filled with ornaments, lights, and garlands that had been collected over the years. Each item held a special memory, from the delicate glass baubles that had adorned their first tree, to the wooden nativity set Edward had carved by hand decades ago. Together they trimmed the tree, which stood proudly in the corner of the living room near the window. The scent of fresh pine filled the air as they hung the ornaments, strung the lights, and topped the tree with a silver star, a family heirloom that had graced the top of their Christmas tree for generations. The mantel was adorned with fresh garlands of pine and holly, and candles were placed throughout the room, their soft light adding to the cozy atmosphere. Lillian, who had always taken pride in her baking, spent several days preparing the Christmas treats that had become a staple of their holiday celebrations. The kitchen was filled with the sweet aromas of gingerbread, cinnamon, and nutmeg, as she baked cookies, fruit cakes, and her famous mince pies. Edward, ever the eager taste tester, was more than happy to help decorate the cookies, carefully adding icing and sprinkles, with a steady hand and a playful smile. On Christmas Eve, their children and grandchildren arrived at Willowbrook Cottage, bringing with them the joy and excitement that only the holiday season can inspire. The cottage, with its twinkling lights and festive decorations, was filled with laughter and the warmth of family. The dining table was set with their finest china and silverware, and a feast fit for the occasion was prepared. Roast turkey with all the trimmings, buttery mashed potatoes, roasted vegetables, and Lillian's Christmas pudding, which she served with a generous helping of brandy sauce. After the meal, the family gathered around the Christmas tree for the exchange of gifts. The grandchildren's eyes sparkled with anticipation as they unwrapped their presents, while the adults exchanged thoughtful tokens of love and appreciation. When the last gift was opened, Edward took out his old leather-bound copy of A Christmas Carol and began to read aloud, his voice deep and soothing as it brought the timeless tale to life. The room grew quiet, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the rustle of wrapping paper as the grandchildren curled up by the hearth, drifting off to sleep. As the evening drew to a close, the family said their goodbyes, promising to return next year. Edward and Lillian, once again alone in their beloved cottage, sat by the fire, content in the knowledge that they had shared another beautiful Christmas with those they loved most. Before retiring for the night, they stepped outside into the crisp, cold air, hand in hand, to stand beneath the stars. The snow-covered garden, illuminated by the moon, looked magical, as if dusted with diamonds. "Merry Christmas, my love," Edward whispered, his voice filled with emotion. "Merry Christmas, Edward," Lillian replied, her eyes shining with love. "Here's to many more." And, as they returned to the warmth of Willowbrook Cottage, they knew that the true gifts of Christmas, the love they shared, the joy of family, and the warmth of their home, were treasures that would stay with them forever. And, as they drifted off to sleep, the fire continued to glow softly, a beacon of warmth and light in the heart of the countryside, where the past and present came together in a gentle embrace. Thank you for visiting Story Planet, where every story is a gateway to a world of imagination and comfort. We hope you enjoyed Forever at Willowbrook Cottage, a tale of love that endures through all seasons. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Story Planet for more cozy tales that warm the soul. Until next time, keep dreaming and keep believing in the magic of stories.